Are you dreading giving a bad performance review to an employee? If so, you're not alone. Truth of the matter is, most of us hate giving bad reviews and, frankly, don't do a very good job of it at all. In this video, I'm going to share with you 5 key steps to take to ensure that you are as good as you can be through a very difficult conversation. And if you stay to the end, I'm going to share with you one very common mistake that people make and that you ought to avoid. So, the first important step here is to start off by sharing your own ambivalence about the conversation itself. So what do I mean by that? Well, most of us really don't like having to give negative performance reviews. It feels stressful, we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, we want to be avoidant, etc., etc. But of course, we are the boss, we are the supervisor, we're the manager. Part of our job is to give clear, direct feedback. And so in preparation, when I'm coaching a manager on how to give a negative performance review, I'll often have them set up 2 chairs in the room, literally 2 physical chairs. And I'll say, okay, in this chair is the side of you that is feeling really anxious about the conversation. And then in this chair is the side of you that knows you have to deliver the negative feedback anyway and the reasons why it's important. And I literally invite this person to go back and forth between the 2 chairs in a soliloquy. And so in the one chair, they might say, I don't want to hurt feelings. I'm afraid that maybe I won't come across as clearly as I want to. I really like them. I'm afraid it won't matter anyway. And then in the other chair, they'll say, well, I think there's some really specific things that if this person could improve, they'll have a future in this company. If I don't raise it, they won't get better. If I don't raise it, I'll still have all the problems I have with the things the employee isn't doing right, and et cetera, right? And so what I typically will do then is say, in the opening of your feedback conversation, do a mashup of the 2 chairs. So what might that look like? It might look like saying, let's just imagine the person we're giving feedback to, let's imagine her name is Cheryl, right? Cheryl, on the one hand, this is going to be a really hard conversation for me. And it's going to be hard because I'm worried I won't be as articulate or as clear as I might prefer to be, or that I might get misunderstood, or maybe even upset you. On the other hand, it's important. And it's important because I want to do all I can to make you succeed here, because I also know that you can't improve without feedback from me, and because I think there's some real opportunities for professional growth in this conversation. So I think by sharing both of these, it helps establish your own confidence and clarity around purpose. And this really goes to the second tip, which is if you need to give negative feedback, you want to be clear and direct about your purpose. Meaning that you want to literally say, part of the reason why we're here today is that there's some things that are not going well that I feel like I need to share with you. And I imagine that this will be hard for you as it is for me. What you don't want to do is something that we call backing in, which is being all sorts of avoidant and maybe leaving like a breadcrumb or 2 of a hint that something isn't going well. And part of the reason why we tend to do that, right, is we're so worried about leaving a negative impression that we don't give enough useful feedback. And so being clear and direct means actually saying, there's some tough things I'm going to share with you, and my purpose is to help you improve so that we can perform better as a team or better as an organization. The other thing related to this is avoiding asking an indirect or a leading question. So for example, let's imagine that Cheryl was in charge of our efforts at the national conference and everything went wrong at the national conference from our perspective as the boss. Saying to Cheryl something like, so how do you think it went when we were in Omaha? Is a leading question. It's not a winner for her. If she says, I think it went terribly, she feels really bad. But if she says, well, I thought it went pretty well, all things considered, now you're in kind of a rough spot. So these indirect or leading questions are things to really be avoided. Third, when you're giving negative feedback, considering your own contribution can be really hard because as a manager, you're thinking, I hired them to do X, Y, and Z. I have no contribution. The contribution is theirs. Or you might even think, well, I gave them feedback once and they didn't take it. Or how could they be so dumb as to not know that they need to show up on time? But often they're what I call hidden spots of contribution that managers sometimes make unaware. So what are they? Sometimes a manager just comes off as very unapproachable, or maybe they are unavailable, or maybe they failed to meet some basic emotional needs of their team, like showing appreciation, or they failed to do some basic things that employees need, like make them feel appreciated, or make them feel like their role on the team is important, an important one. Let me give you a real life example that I was involved with as a coach. So I was coaching a senior VP who had a repeating problem with her executive assistant. Over and over, this executive assistant would make variations of the same mistake. And every single time, the executive vice president would point out the mistake to the employee, and the employee would apologize and say it won't happen again. And so at this point, the senior VP in a session with me is saying, I basically feel like I need to fire this person. I mean, they're just not competent. And I said, okay, that might be right. Can I ask you if there's any contribution you think you might have made to this situation? And the senior VP said, oh yeah, I think there is one. I shouldn't have hired them. I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. I mean anything else in the context of your relationship. And they thought for a second. I was like, I don't think so. And I said, so how would you feel if I had a conversation with the executive assistant myself? And they said, go for it. Good luck. So in this conversation with the executive assistant, one of the things that I learned is that the VP, not surprisingly, was an extremely busy, high-performing person who was constantly running around, traveling, managing all sorts of projects. And early in this assistant's tenure, actually on 3 separate occasions, they asked their boss what they wanted for a particular project. And every single time, the boss got very short, yelled at the assistant, and basically said they should know how to do this at this point. So what the executive assistant learned is if you ask a question, there's a 100% chance that your head is going to get bitten off. If you don't ask a question and you guess, 80% of the time, you'll be fine. You'll have done what you were supposed to do. 20% of the time, you will get yelled at afterwards, and then you just apologize and keep moving forward. So the choice for the executive assistant was 100% chance of getting my head bit off, 20% chance of getting my head bit off. I think I'll go with the 20% chance. And so what that meant was that the contribution of the supervisor was not being approachable. And so what we were able to do is craft a way that the assistant could get some time from their boss to actually talk through some of the issues that were confusing. So I think there's always hidden contributions, and you want to think about what yours might be. Fourth, it's really important for you to make space for their response and to listen actively. So when you're giving negative feedback, it's not a negotiation. You're the boss, right? And you are sharing the feedback. On the other hand, you can learn a lot by actually doing some good active listening. You can get a sense of where the problems actually are. And even if your employee doesn't ever agree with you, just by making space for them and making them feel heard, you increase the likelihood that they'll actually implement the next steps. Speaking of next steps, this leads to the 5th point, which is to jointly work on an improvement plan. So one of the things I often see supervisors do is to say, you need to do A, B, C, D, E, and F. I'm sympathetic to this. The problem with it is that the employee has no stake in that plan. But if, on the other hand, you've laid out the areas of concern and then said, let's think about what are some ways that we can hatch a plan to address these together, you will get some of the ideas from your employee. And even if not all the ideas are good ones, the ones that are good are ones that they will be much more bought into. Okay, so you've all been waiting for what is the common mistake to avoid in these conversations. It's something that I hear all the time, and it's the compliment sandwich. So what is the compliment sandwich? It's me saying one thing I think you're doing well, then slipping in the bad news, and then ending with another thing I think you're doing well. I get the idea of sharing worked wells in a feedback conversation, and I think that's really important. I think the formula of the compliment sandwich doesn't work. And it doesn't work because it doesn't follow that earlier rule I gave you about being clear and direct in your purpose. By throwing it in the middle, it's easy to get lost and to be downplayed. And part of your purpose in giving negative feedback is to get their attention, to share the data, and to come up with a plan for them to improve. And so hiding it between two happy pieces of tasty bread just doesn't do that. So the reality is giving negative feedback to our employees is never easy, but there are 5 things you can do to increase the likelihood of success. So first, prepare by considering your own ambivalence about the conversation, and then start by sharing both the fears you have from having the conversations and the reasons why it's important. Second, be clear and direct about your purpose. Avoid backing in. Third, consider your own contribution to the situation. It is true, perhaps, that your employee hasn't lived up to expectations, but there may be some ways that you have contributed either actively or passively. Fourth, make space for their response and be sure to listen actively. And then lastly, don't just impose an improvement plan for them. Work jointly to create one so that they have buy-in and specificity and know what they need to do. So to continue your journey on being a better manager, watch this next video, which is how can I improve my communication skills at work? In addition, if you're new to my channel, I'd be really grateful if you could hit the subscribe button and please like this video and ring the bell so you don't miss new videos from me. Okay, you know you want to improve those communication skills. Click, click, click.